I love what the president has introduced. President Trump has, let's say, he's solidified a way of thinking that we always had, but we only used it periodically. And that way of thinking is if you have an economic option, you just always use that. Use economics first and military last. Attacking North Korea is a terrible outcome. So we don't want to attack them. Having them continue to have nuclear weapons and develop them and point them in our direction, terrible outcome. We don't want that. But keeping their nuclear weapons, but agreeing to point them at their enemy instead of us, we might be able to live with that. We might be able to. I don't know. All of the options are bad, right? If you only have bad options, you have to pick the least bad one. If you have an option that is both possible and better than that, I'd like to hear it, because you might have an excellent idea. Here's a North Korea peace plan that you did not see coming. Are you ready? It goes like this. The United States declares peace and surrenders to North Korea in the context of the North Korean War that, at least on paper, has been going on for generations. Are you ready? So the United States declares peace, says formally that the end of the North Korea conflict is over. Maybe it takes a congressional offer. And we surrender to North Korea. Do you see where it's going yet? And then we say to North Korea, well, here's the deal. In return for surrendering, because it's not an unconditional surrender, it's a conditional surrender, which is fine. There are unconditional surrenders and there are conditional surrenders, and both of them can work. So we say it's a conditional surrender, and it looks like this. You get to North Korea. You have to wait for the punchline, because I know that the first part of this sounds terrible to you, but wait for the punchline. All right, it's worth it. So we say to North Korea, it's a conditional. What we want is to be able to monitor your nuclear weapons, and you can keep them. Are you ready? I haven't got to the good part yet. So we end the war formally. We surrender to North Korea. We give them the victory. Say, well, you win. We can't defeat you. We surrender. All we ask in return is that you don't point your nukes in our direction. But if you wanted to point your nukes toward China, we think that would be pretty smart, because China's your biggest threat. And once we've surrendered and declared an end of hostilities, perhaps we can be part of your defense against our common enemy, China. I'm looking at the comments. One says, absolutely not, and the other says, awesome. Now, somebody's laughing at me and saying, Scott, China and North Korea are partners. Don't you understand that they're allies, Scott? You stupid bastard, Scott. Here's what I understand. Do you think that Kim Jong-un is more afraid of Trump or President Xi? Which one poses the biggest risk to North Korea? In the long run? In the long run, I don't know if it's China, but I'll bet we could convince them it is. So here's the thing. Let me boil this back to its essence. Lots of smart people have said, and they might not be wrong, lots of smart people have said that North Korea will never give up its nukes. There's just no way it will ever do that. Let's say that's true. Is it also true that they can't be convinced to point their weapons at their biggest risk and not at us, who just declared peace, surrendered, And maybe we remove some assets from South Korea, some military assets. That may depend on other factors as well. But what if we just say, North Korea, we love you guys. Why don't we just be friends? We surrender. And maybe you could help us protect against the common risk that we both hold, which is China and Russia, maybe. I don't know how Russia works in here, but so the whole idea boils down to this. If you believe it's true that North Korea will never get rid of their nukes, what's your best outcome if they're going to keep them? Well, attacking North Korea is a terrible outcome. So we don't want to attack them. Having them continue to have nuclear weapons and develop them and point them in our direction, terrible outcome. We don't want that. But keeping their nuclear weapons, but agreeing to point them at their enemy instead of us, we might be able to live with that. We might be able to. I don't know. All of the options are bad, right? If you only have bad options, you have to pick the least bad one. If you have an option that is both possible and better than that, I'd like to hear it, because you might have an excellent idea. What about all the starving North Koreans? The starving North Koreans would be fed if they have peace with the United States, because then the trade sanctions are off. So North Korea gets food, they get to keep their nuclear weapons. They just have to work with us to point them in a different direction. That's all. Just point them in a different direction. Now, I realize that the problem is that it's easy to retarget your nukes, and if they ever got mad at the United States, they'd have all these nukes they could point in our direction. But isn't that true of Great Britain too? Great Britain has nukes. If they ever got really mad at us, they could point them at us. But we're not worried about it because they're an ally. Israel has nukes. If they wanted to, they could point them at the United States. But we're not worried about it because they're allies. North Korea could keep nukes if they became allies. And what would prevent North Korea? Somebody says, Scott is not very bright. Well, you just got blocked. And remember, I'm completely open to you telling me why an idea won't work. So that's perfectly good. But Scott's not very bright, Scott is so naive, is not really a reason. What about Iran, somebody says? I think Iran looks like it's self-solving. It looks like Iran's economy is going in such a bad direction, and they've got a huge young population who's going to want their internet and they're going to want their capitalism, I think. So I think Iran is just wait. I love what the president has introduced. President Trump has, let's say, he's solidified a way of thinking that we always had, but we only used it periodically. And that way of thinking is, if you have an economic option, you just always use that. Use economics first and military last. So that's what the president is doing with Iran. It's economics first, military last. It's what he's doing with North Korea. We're not attacking North Korea. It's economics first. And the beauty of this method is, let me put it this way. If you only ever did economic sanctions rarely, it's just, in the rarest case you would use them, I don't think they'd be as good. Because if you only use them rarely, it looks just like war. But if you were to say instead, the following countries are economically, let's say, they have a good business record, then you could say we're going to do as much business as we can with all the countries that are reliable business partners. Forget about military, just business. If they're reliable business partners, we'll do business with you. don't care about your government or anything else. But if you're not a reliable part of the international economic system, you're completely shut out. And I think that's where we're heading. I think we're heading to a point where the downside of being a bad actor is just being shut out of the international economic system.